Coming up, we ask if our country is being governed by two political parties or two great cults and their zealot followers. You do not want to miss this interview coming up next, so stay tuned to Watching the Hawks. Here in the United States of America, we've had a long and tragic history with cults. You have Scientology, NXIVM, Heaven's Gate, Jim Jones. We know the names, we've poured over the headlines, and we've consumed every last documentary on Netflix, YouTube, and every other streaming platform in between. And while we often feel sadness and compassion for cult survivors, mystery and intrigue and even jest at their bizarre inner workings, and of course anger and disdain for their charismatic, dangerous Pied Piper leaders, but lost amidst the 21st century America's fascination with cults, is the most important question. Is cult-like mentality and control simply and only contained to just a few small groups living on the fringes of regular, normal society? Or are we actually surrounded by cults and their followers, but we are just used to them because they're not called Scientology or NXIVM? They're called Republicans and Democrats or Catholics and Lutherans or Kappa Alpha Theta or Sigma Alpha Epsilon. Take the Democrat and Republican political parties. Both demand indoctrination, both demand unwavering allegiance and unquestioning commitment to their charismatic leaders. Both demand your time and money, no matter the state of your economy. Both reward zealotry or discourage or even punish any kind of questioning or dissent of party beliefs and values. And they both practice an us versus them mentality. Well, to help us answer these questions and explore society's need to belong and how that gives rise to this cult mentality is the professor of religious studies at the University of Calgary, Irving Hexham. Irving, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Professor, let me ask, given the nature of politics here in the United States or around the world for that matter, is there an argument to be made that our two great political parties are dangerously cult-like in their practice and control of their followers? Are we being governed by two cults?
I think in many ways, yes. There are similarities because when we investigated cults, they weren't quite as bad as most people think they are. They were ordinary people who joined cults, and they joined cults for particular reasons. And what was usually left out when people talked about cults was, why did they join? And so my wife and I did a lot of interviews with people in groups like the Unification Church and asked them, why do you join? What does it mean to you? And they always came back with a similar sort of answer. Basically, the cult met a need, and it was a personal need that they were feeling at the time that they met the members of the group they joined. And the group gave them security, it gave them answers to the world, and it helped them cope with life. And I think this is very important in understanding that people need some sort of thought system. They need some sort of social system that they feel a part of. And many people in modern society simply don't feel a part of society. They feel left out. They're on the fringe. The difference, I think, although maybe it's not a great difference, was that many people who joined the new religious movements that we studied, which is the academic term for cults, they did so because they were doing very well. A lot of them, surprisingly, came from very happy families. They came from a very good background. And they got to university and they started having relationships with members of the opposite sex, and they didn't work. And other relationships didn't work. The way they were going through university just wasn't working for them. And they felt they were letting their families down very much. And then one day they met a member of one of the various groups like Hare Krishna or something else, and these people talked to them and they treated them as real people, and they understood what was happening to them. They said, yeah, we've been there, we can help you. And so they joined these groups and became very committed members.
Wow.
So I was in middle school and high school, early high school in the early 2000s, and Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, was kind of a big deal. We basically talked a lot about what was going on and how the internet and how the emergence of social media was going to change the way people felt and how they organized. What do you think are the differences between the mentality of being a follower of a cult and its leadership and being an active member in a political group or a major religious group, athleticism or anything like that? What are the differences, considering they all have a similar leadership structure and groups that kind of follow them without really asking too many questions?
Yeah, I think socially there's very little difference. There's a difference in terms of what they believe, and some groups like Jonestown, and they had very bizarre beliefs, which did lead to the suicide which took place. But many other groups weren't like that. They offered help. And the thing about, I think the difference between people being in the Republicans or the Democrats, which have many of the features of a cult, is that most of the people who joined new religious movements usually left after 5 or 6 years. And they didn't leave because they were deprogrammed. They left because they grew out of it. Whereas political parties are with us, and I'm afraid they stick around, don't they, a long time.
That they
So
most
it's
definitely do.
rather, there is a difference.
That they most definitely do. I want to ask you, why is it that some human beings are so conditioned to conform? I mean, when you look back at like the, I think it's the Asch conformity experiments of like the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which discovered that on average 1/3 of people in that experiment kind of chose to go along to get along rather than being an individual in those experiments. Why are human beings so desperate to conform?
Well, I don't know that they're desperate to conform, but in certain set conditions, under certain conditions, it's possible to turn a person who's normally a good, reasonable person into a monster. And there are a number of studies of groups like the SS in Germany. There are a number of German studies on the people who committed atrocities. And the surprising thing is that they were decent people to begin with. And it took, they reckon, about 2 weeks to turn a person from being a really reasonable person to being a horror who's prepared to do anything, because they're drawn in and they're shaped by the group. So there's group pressure, there's personal pressures, and people get trapped in these situations. And this is why I think people said anyone who joins a cult must be brainwashed. Well, no, they weren't brainwashed. They came as reasonable people, and the cult met a need. And we've also got to ask, I think, what need do political parties meet? How do their members respond? Why do people join in the first place? What are they offering people? And I don't think we think enough about that.
And Professor, what do you believe is the most misunderstood aspect of cult thinking? What are people getting wrong when they think about, how cults operate?
Well, I think the most misunderstood thing is that people think that the people who join are forced to join. They're somehow blinded or hypnotized into joining, and they're not. It's a matter of free choice, and one's got to ask what it is that creates the need for these groups in the individual. And that's where one simply got to talk to the people involved, and you find there are many differences, but in general, there's a search for meaning, there's a search for understanding, and there's a search for friendship. Now, they may not get these. They may join a political party and it turns out to be awful, just like joining a group can be awful. But that's what they're searching for.
Wow. Well, I want to say thank you so much for coming on today and educating our audience. It's indeed an honor and a pleasure to have you on, Professor. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor to be on. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, that is our show for you today, and a fascinating one at that. I just have to say that was an interesting conversation with you, Professor.
It was perfect.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
Kept talking to him
all day long. All right, everybody, remember, in this world, we are definitely not told that we are loved enough. So I tell you all, I love you. I am Tyrell Ventura.
And I'm Amisha Cross.
Keep on watching all those hawks out there, and have a great day and night, everybody.